So, the previous week's lecture on the self and personal identity points towards a particular tension buried in its central question of what makes me who I am. And that tension is that each answer to the question of personal identity and/or the nature of the self, each answer to these questions um, assumes some sort of relationship between the mind and the body. It assumes in some way that I am, that I am my experiences in some meaningful way. Right? And my experiences are something that belong to my mind, but they come to me through the body, right? Through the senses. This is its own unique philosophical problem, known as the mind-body problem. And it has its origins in Western philosophy with the turn towards modernity. Right? It is with the birth of the mind-body problem, in fact, that we have the turn towards modern philosophy, right? As opposed to, Christian or theological religious philosophy that dominated um, European thought from the time of, well, I'd say Christianity, but really more since the fall of the Holy Roman Empire, right? So about 350 AD or so, until about 1500 AD, right? 1600 AD. And that's a long time for this. Um, and a lot of this turn towards a modern philosophy, the division point between modern and what we might call pre-modern philosophy, for the two or three sort of revolutions of philosophy that came before, can really be marked by the figure of René Descartes. Right? So René Descartes was a philosopher who was both deeply influenced by the rise of the empirical sciences and empirical method of Francis Bacon and empirical investigation, basically early science, what we would call science, right? Not pre-empirical method science. So he was deeply influenced by both this and by ancient philosophers, right? And both ancient philosophers like Aristotle and Plato, and the skeptics, as well as the Christian theologian philosophers, such as Thomas Aquinas and Blaise Pascal. Well, not Blaise Pascal, but Saint Augustine, Saint Anselm. He was inspired by all of these people. Right? And he tried to reconcile in his own way what he thought were very disparate lines of thought. So for this reason, this attempt at reconciliation, Descartes is often called the father of modern philosophy in the West. Right? No one really holds that title in the Eastern traditions, although there are one or two who are given something close to it in Indian philosophical traditions. Right? And his magnum opus, his great work, is called the Meditations. Right? Or Meditations in First Philosophy. First philosophy meaning metaphysics. That was the traditional name for metaphysics. Now you have to understand, in attempting to reconcile early physical sciences with philosophy, with metaphysics in particular, Descartes wanted to put philosophy on unshakable foundations. Right? Some foundation that absolutely could not be doubted, and build philosophy, build metaphysics from there, and based off of that, the rest of philosophy as a whole, he thought, could follow. So what Descartes in his meditations attempted to do was establish some first principle or first principles of philosophy. And these first principles, this first principle being something unassailable, right? An undoubtable starting point from which all philosophy could be built. Right? And in order to do this, in his meditations, he adopted what is known as radical doubt as his method, right? Or radical skepticism. Right? And radical doubt is the idea that if something can be doubted once, then it can be called into question again and again and again and again and again. And for as many times as it can be called into question, that therefore makes it questionable. Right? So if you can question something once, you cannot be undoubtable. Right? And therefore it cannot be a foundational source for philosophy to be built upon. Right? So Descartes uses this method of radical doubt to try and to try and establish a first principle. And he uses it first to see whether or not the house that philosophy has been built on, right, specifically epistemology, the two sources of knowledge that philosophers have traditionally accepted, experience a posteriori knowledge, and reason, a priori knowledge, are really reliable. Well, the case against experience is pretty straightforward. He says that, okay, well, imagine taking a straight stick, putting it in water, right? Well, that's going to bend. What do you see? How do you see the stick once it's in water? Well, with the right, angle of the light and everything, the stick now looks bent. Pull it out, you see it's still straight. The water didn't bend the stick, right? Light refracting off the surface of the water made the stick appear to be bent. There go our senses as a reliable source of knowledge, right? We can doubt them. There's enough cause to doubt them if we can doubt them in one instance. And experience has told us, well, at least me personally, that our senses can be mistaken. We can be mistaken based off of what our senses tell us again and again and again. For reason, his argument was a little bit more, I don't want to say complex, but let's go with esoteric. Right? For reason, right? He says, well, surely logic cannot be proven to be doubtable. Right? 2 plus 2 must equal 4. Right? This is just something that seems intuitive to us. But he says, what if all the thoughts that we have, all the reasoning that we do that has nothing to do with experience, all that takes place up here in the mind, that seems perfectly logical, is in fact a deception by some great evil demon, right? That has supplanted the thoughts, or that has tricked our minds. A more contemporary version of this would be, what if we are just brains in a vat? All of our experience, all of our thoughts, even the thought of 2 plus 2 equaling 4, are just illusions based off of, electrodes attached to us slimy little brains in a vat, a brain in a vat, with some scientist out of control stimulating the various neural centers. Right? That's the contemporary version of this, right? Is the brain in the vat. And in fact, the thought that all the thoughts we have that we think are so logical mean nothing. That 2 plus 2 equals 4 makes as much sense logically as chinchilla butt, elephant trunk, car, clown, spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. Right? try stringing that as a sentence. Right? It's just they're equally logical thoughts. Right? Or they potentially could be equally illogical thoughts. So if we can doubt reason and we can doubt experience, then what are we left with? Right? It doesn't seem to be much, if anything. And according to Descartes, this is where his genius sort of shines through. Um, we are left with something, and that's that we can doubt. In order for the evil demon to be able to deceive us, right, there must be something or someone to deceive, some thinking thing whose thoughts can be manipulated. Right? And as long as that's the case, there must be a self, an essential self, to go back to last week. Right? Uh, and this essential self must be a thinking self. So here we get a further divide in Descartes uh, between two types of existence. We have res cogitans, res meaning thing in Latin, cogitans meaning thinking. So we have the thinking thing, which perceives, experiences, and is non-extended, does not have space or form, right? Because the only thing we've been able to conclude so far is that I think, therefore I am, right? Cogito ergo sum, this was his first principle. I think, therefore I exist, which led to the idea of a res cogitans. Right? The only thing we can be certain of is there is at least a thinking thing. And then, on the other side, you have res extensa, or an extended thing, right? The body. If res cogitans is the mind, res extensa is the body. And this is an extended thing. Right? It's non-perceiving, non-experiencing, but it takes up space. Right? The mind, we haven't been able to, it's not proven, according to Descartes, that the mind takes up space. But it does think, it does perceive, and it does feel. The body, however, does take up space. So how do we reconcile these two majorly different things?